Greetings, YouTube. It has been weeks since I have done what I like to affectionately refer to as a late night Prof. Hoff quarantine style video. It is almost 1 a.m. Central Standard Time, and those of you across the pond, you might be waking up to this, so good morning, lovelies. But it turns out that after Kabam Mike's extremely passive-aggressive post in which he said a lot of words that actually communicated very little, Kabam Welker decided to put out sort of like a public relations redo, a mulligan, in the words of the golfing community. And so this is kind of more of hopefully what they look to be reassurance that they understand that in order to make sure that you just don't need the same 2 or 3 or 5 champions to complete content, that it's also going to take some evolution in pro player nodes. So let's check out this post, and shout out to Chase, who sent this to me. I'd like to start by thanking everyone here for giving us a chance and providing feedback that is likely going to reshape the face of content still to come. This beta test has taught us a lot. What's required after this beta is more than just replacing some problematic defenders and returning some attack values. There is work to be done. Now, I want to say, flat off the top, that's a great start to a post. I like to keep it 100 on my channel. I like to call out Kabam when they're doing terrible public relations and not putting out a fire, but I also like to commend them when they do things that help the community and when they're transparent, which has been a promise by them for several years that sometimes happens and frankly sometimes doesn't. I'd like to share some important takeaways from this beta that we're going to embrace going forward as we craft this chapter and the future of the contest. Number 1. We're eager to start designing more nodes and encounters that don't punish players for not bringing in the perfect counter, in quotes, and do more to reward the optimal play. Keep in mind, this makes me think of the node that I've talked about in past videos, Life Transfer. If you're unfamiliar with that node, when I first played it in Act 5, I was just in love with the path because I'm a heavy parry player that's pretty defensive and uses parry to go on offense, and now I'm also somebody that likes to bait a heavy and counter with a heavy of my own or a combo. Anyhow, it was a node that punished you if you weren't aggressive, but if you were even mildly aggressive, you could turn it into a health potion. And back then, my best champion by far was an Awakened Starlord, but my second best champion was an Awakened Juggernaut, somebody that most people, including myself, put at the bottom of the game at this point. But he wrecked in Life Transfer. I loved using my Juggernaut and becoming unstoppable and starting the fight with a guaranteed advantage because I knew since I was starting the fight unstoppable, I was going to be able to refresh the health that I had lost maybe in the previous fight by starting with the advantage when the fight kicked off. So, just a side. We also acknowledge that optimal play shouldn't mean bring one of these 5 specific champs, or I hope you like intercepting. Boy, I love reading that, except for in very specific situations. That isn't to say that there won't be some content that requires some narrow counters, but it shouldn't be entire chapters of an act. We want to use more positive feedback loops, like buffs that deliver on a satisfying damage spike when the right moves are made. I hope that is alluding to what I was talking to my Battle Room bestie Katie Candy about tonight, which is you have what makes Incursion so much fun. You can take a champion in there that is fairly average, and then you can choose some hacks, and suddenly you've got a champion, like let's say we're talking about Juggernaut that I just talked about. Suddenly you got Juggernaut that's doing shock damage or incinerate damage, or you've got a boost on your attack so they're hitting more like a god tier champion instead of a wet noodle, and you are in control of it. It's kind of like the equivalent of the Nexus enhancements, which is reminding me of a 1 out of 3 choice for a Nexus Crystal. And so if you have situations where you bring in champions that maybe aren't the best counters by themselves without buffs, but then you can choose certain hacks that are complementary toward them. I've seen great videos of somebody like Mordo, who I would never think to bring into content, killing it in incursions because of hacks. And so this is just a suggestion to continue to follow a template that they've already put forward in 2020 in a different area of the contest. We also want to be more forgiving, informative, in less commonly used negative feedback loops, similar to the combo of spiked armor with Dold. Number 2, we're going to be more mindful and deliberate with our counterplay and encounter design. Even the most enjoyable buff node combinations can be utterly ruined with the wrong defender. Lord knows that's true. Even then, viable champions use is more complex than do they have access to X buff or how consistently can they apply Y debuff. Attack and health values are an integral axis of design that should be deliberately examined and set rather than tuned based on legacy or perceived necessary challenge. I gotta be honest, that was a very academic paragraph. I think I kind of understand what they're saying, but hopefully kind of following point 1, they're just looking to have champions that aren't normally used with better value. Number 3, you have invested or want to invest in more than just God tier or beyond God tier champions. Shout out to Seaton. Pretty sure I didn't start using that language before Seaton did, and I know that it's in different games, but pretty sure that's another credit to his influence on even the way that you have Kabam mods talk about champions in the game. Impressive. While we can't promise story content that'll give you a reason to dust off your 2 stars or a better reason to chase X-Force Deadpool, throwing shade at X-Force Deadpool. God, I love that. We know that it gets stale only using the same 3 to 5 answers for everything. We want to do a better job designing content so that players are able to take in the best champions they have on hand and feel like they stand a solid chance, while still maintaining that RPG knowledge and skill that are an important factor. We respect the investments players have made in their robots, and their bleed champions, and their buff-centric cosmic champions, and don't want them to feel like a waste of resources. So, what they just talked about with robots, for example, they could say, well, hey, on this path, you can take in your normal counters, but if you bring in a robot, after each successful fight, you can choose a hack that gives them an additional buff, but it's only for people who are robots, for example. Something like that. Something incursions like that is going to make you think, well, I could take in Aegon, but maybe I should take in Nebula. Just an example. We're going to revisit old designs and come up with new ways to reuse them in future content that adds value to the solutions you all found the first time you overcame them. It's also a fancy way of hopefully saying we're going to continue to buff champs that suck. There's a lot more than that as well, but we're still pouring over the awesome mountain of feedback we've been getting. Notice how, I just want to point this out, nothing about this post is condescending. Nothing about it is, I'm up here, you're down here. It's very transparent. This is among the best, if not the best post I've ever seen from a Kabam forum mod. So I applaud whoever wrote this, and I would hope that Kabam would have them write more content. If I was grading this post as a journalism professor, this would get an A. You may not hear back from us on this for a little while, but don't take that as a bad sign. We're breaking up with you. Just kidding, I added that. We're taking a step back so we can reevaluate the long-term vision for this chapter in Book 2, Act 1 as a whole. This also is not meant to address feedback on other areas of the game that we have received recently, but only about the new Act content. We want to thank you all again and let you know that your concerns, your questions, and your comments are being heard. They are what we're going to use to make this next saga of the contest better. Okay, so obviously we discussed in videos in the past 24 to 48 hours one of the issues, and really I feel like there's 2 main issues being addressed right now. I've heard from people who they really need Aegon, or they really need Doctor Doom, for example, or Captain America Infinity War, and they've opened hundreds of crystals. They've opened featured cabs, 5 stars, featured 5 stars, 6 stars, nada, right? No chance to get the champion, and they're stuck. And for those people, it's a nightmare, and they feel like if they just get that champion, and maybe, of course, they also need to get that champion in some cases awakened and at high sig, which is a separate problem in another discussion. Keep in mind, I talk about champions like, say, Aegon as 1/3 of the puzzle. 1/3 is getting the champion, the second third is awakening, and the third third is actually taking them up to as high a sig as possible. But in the meantime, I also know people who have all the champions that you think would make great counters, and they're still getting absolutely destroyed in the beta. And so even if you have the crazy RNGesus luck, or have spent enough money to pull the 5 and 6 star champions and awaken them that you think you need to wreck content, you're still finding that it feels like it is stacked against you. I'm not saying that fights shouldn't be difficult, because of course we also have the other end of the community in this discussion that often complains content's too easy and they're bored. So you want to satisfy those people, but at the same time, you want it to be a fair fight, and you do want to encourage having champions that are more useful going forward than we've seen in the past. So I applaud Kabam Welker because I do believe this was worded well. This is a step in the right direction, and this is, gosh, day and night compared to the wording of that Kabam Mike post from earlier in this 24-hour period. I just want to say, too, I still love this game. I still want to play it every day. I still want to answer questions every day. I still want to grow the community every day and use my voice for good. Hopefully that is shown in this post. But at the same time, I think as a community, games end, right? And sometimes it kind of seems like you think back and you think of sort of like a relationship, like what went wrong and what could we have done to extend it versus end it. And these are the kind of conversations we need to have. They're not the easiest conversations to have, but if we don't have them and everybody just suddenly starts to quit, then the game will go away. And will people find a new game to play? Sure. But if you're like me and you've committed to something for about 5 years, you want to keep it going as long as you can. And that's how I feel about MCOC right now. Have a great night, a great morning, a great evening. However you are finding yourself clicking on this video, thank you for clicking on it. You had a lot of choices in this pandemic, and you chose to click on this one, and I appreciate it. And again, I appreciate Kabam Welker, and for that matter, Chase as well, for sending this over to me to commentate before I attempt to fight my biggest nemesis. No, it is not anything Kabam or MCOC related. It deals with my original foe, the foe known as insomnia.